It all began like any other typical story of betrayal. I was getting ready for a business trip, making my way to my private plane, when I got a call telling me I wasn't needed after all. I decided to bring the plane back to the hangar, knowing I'd need it again in a few days, and parked it before heading back home. I checked in with my boss, and after a brief conversation, we agreed I could take the rest of the day off. It was nearing 4 o'clock, and by the time I reached home, it would be around 5:30, just about the time my wife usually returned from work. I figured I'd surprise her and maybe take her out for dinner. Turned out, I did manage to surprise her, but the real shock came from her end. As soon as she found out I was leaving, she and a friend apparently made plans and left work early to get ahead of the evening. When I pulled into the garage, her car was parked next to another one I didn't recognize. My gut twisted. I knew right then something wasn't right. Cautiously, I entered the house, already bracing myself for the worst. My suspicions were confirmed quickly enough. There were signs everywhere. Shoes tossed by the back door, a blouse carelessly thrown on the steps, and a trail of clothing that led me right to the spare bedroom. The door was left half open, as if they were in too much of a hurry to bother closing it. And there they were. I found them just like I feared. He was standing by the bed, while she, my loving wife, was on her knees, giving him her undivided attention. His grunts of pleasure were unmistakable, and though I had somewhat prepared myself for what I might walk into, the sight still rattled me. For anyone thinking I might have been twisted enough to enjoy this, let me stop you right there. I wasn't. This was my wife, the woman I trusted, caught in an act of intimacy with another man. It took every ounce of willpower I had not to lose it right then and there. I fought hard to keep my emotions in check and stop myself from doing something I'd regret. When he finally had enough and told her to lie down on the bed, that's when I made my move. I cleared my throat, letting them both know I was there. What the hell is going on here? I barked, my voice sharp. And who the hell is this? The guy's expression changed from pleasure to sheer panic in an instant. He stuttered, I thought you were out of town. I looked straight into my wife's eyes, and for the first time, I saw a depth of realization in her face, one I hadn't noticed before. Grab him, I ordered, and follow me downstairs. I picked up his phone from where it had been carelessly discarded and scrolled through the contacts. I found one labeled home and dialed the number. A woman's voice, slightly out of breath, answered the call. Hey, David, she said, recognizing the number. I just got home, so don't tell me you're running late again. I replied calmly, David won't be making any excuses tonight. I'll tell you why he's not calling from his own phone. Don't worry, he's not hurt, well, not yet, anyway. You might want to come over to my place. I just caught David with something of mine, my wife's mouth. The woman on the other end went silent before her shock came through loud and clear. What the? Who is this? I had a feeling something wasn't right, but this. Are you sure? I never want to see him again. Where do you live? I gave her my address and added, drive safe. We wouldn't want anything bad to happen on your way here. If someone deserves to get hurt, it sure as hell isn't you. With that, I hung up and turned my attention back to the two idiots standing in my living room. Stand by the window, I instructed. I don't think so, David said, trying to sound tough. Rachel, on the other hand, didn't resist. She calmly walked over to where I told her to, dragging David along with her. His winces of pain weren't exactly quiet. Damn it, Rachel, let go already, he whined. She's not letting go until I say so, I said with a hint of authority in my voice. There's a lot you don't know about me, David. Hell, there's a lot Rachel doesn't know about me either. I allowed a small smirk to play across my lips. Looks like we've got a little time before your wife gets here. So, why don't I fill you both in? They stared at me with a mix of curiosity and fear. Up until I turned 18, I led a pretty average life. Nothing out of the ordinary, just your typical guy. I'm average height, average weight, average looks, brown hair, brown eyes, medium complexion. Not exactly a heartthrob, but not hard on the eyes either. You'd agree, wouldn't you? Their silence only made the tension thicker. I continued, but around that time, I found out I had a bit of a gift. If I looked someone in the eye for a few seconds, I could plant a thought in their head. My ability could range from harmless fun, like convincing someone their name is now Bert, to something far more extreme. For example, I could make you believe that if you didn't follow my instructions, you'd be consumed by flames so scorching that even hell would seem like a cool breeze. That's the level of control I could exert on Rachel's mind right now. As you can probably guess, I had a lot of fun once I got the hang of this power. Take high school, for instance. There was this one bully I had some unfinished business with, so I made him believe it was completely appropriate to moon the entire crowd during our graduation ceremony. I've pulled all kinds of pranks, and I've used this gift to dodge a bit of trouble with the cops here and there. I've even used it to have a few wild nights with women, ensuring that even if they initially said no, they'd change their minds and end up doing things that would make anyone blush. One time, I ended up with the daughter of a local Air Force general. We were in the middle of some very compromising activities when her mom walked in on us. Now, let me tell you, her mother was stunning. So, naturally, I convinced her to join us. Unfortunately, the general himself arrived before things really escalated. He wasn't exactly thrilled, but I managed to talk him down by explaining that I had a talent for deeply influencing people's thoughts, more powerfully than any hypnosis out there. Well, that caught the attention of Homeland Security. They saw potential in me, especially for things like interrogation and gathering intel. I struck a deal with them, a 6-figure salary, a private plane they maintained for me, and in return, I agreed to perform certain tasks whenever they needed me. My official title? Troubleshooter. So, that's why I sometimes get called away on short notice. Part of our agreement was that I'd stop using my abilities for personal gain, and honestly, over time, I realized I preferred real connections with people who liked me for who I actually am, not because I messed with their minds. Rachel, though, she was the one exception. And now, I'm dealing with the fallout. We'd been talking about starting a family soon, but with everything happening now, I can't help but wonder what's really been going on behind my back. As we waited for his wife to arrive, I stared at David. I figured I'd gather a bit of evidence for later, in case I needed it. I turned to Rachel and ordered her to kiss him and run her hand along his chest while I snapped some pictures. I took about a dozen shots before I heard a car pull up in the driveway. I quickly told Rachel to stop and go back to standing by the window. I set the camera down and headed to the front door, just as she was about to ring the bell. "You must be David's wife," I said as I opened the door. "I'm Jack Derringer, and I believe your husband David is standing there, next to my wife, Rachel." She glanced at the scene, her face a mixture of disbelief and disgust. "I wish I could say it's nice to meet you," she replied dryly before walking straight over to David. He couldn't even look her in the eye. She paused in front of Rachel, who was staring at the floor in shame. Without warning, Lori smacked David hard across the face, sending his head snapping to the side. "Have you no shame?" Lori hissed, her voice full of rage. "Couldn't you at least have put some clothes on?" "Lori, that's on me," I interrupted. I figured making them stay like this might make them feel some shame and regret for what they've done, not just because they got caught. Lori looked them both over, shaking her head in disgust. "Look at that," she said, her voice dripping with scorn. "She won't even let go of him. What kind of shameless woman did you marry, Jack?" I sighed. "Again, that's on me," I explained. "It makes him easier to control. Watch this." Rachel tightened her grip on David, making him wince in pain. "Rachel, why the hell are you doing this?" David groaned, clearly struggling. "What did I ever do to you?" Rachel's response was cold and sharp. That's your stupid question. I glanced at Rachel. Ease up on him a bit, but keep holding on, I instructed before briefly locking eyes with David, just long enough for my influence to take hold. That's all it took. Now, I said, looking at both of them, I want the truth. No more half-baked stories or spinning things to make yourselves look better. You're going to tell us everything. Let's start with you, David. What's the story here? David swallowed hard before finally speaking. We first met back in high school. The idea that this affair might have started before we got married crossed both Lori's and my mind. David continued, we started dating in January of our senior year, right after the second semester began. We came from different social circles, so we hadn't met until then. But once we sat near each other in science class, we really hit it off. We were pretty much inseparable from the start, spending every moment we could together. It was right after Easter break when we first, got intimate. It happened in the back seat of my car. After that, we couldn't stay away from each other. There were never any big fights or drama, we were just totally in love. But then, she left. It was May 2nd. I remember the date like it was yesterday. I went to pick her up for school, like I always did, and her dad was the one who answered the door. He told me she was gone, that she wasn't coming back, and that I should leave and never ask about her again. I was crushed. I had no idea what I'd done wrong, and I couldn't wrap my head around why she'd leave me like that. For weeks, I kept showing up at her place, begging her parents to tell me where she was or what had happened. But they refused to give me any answers. They even threatened to call the police if I didn't stop. Eventually, they made good on that threat, and the cops took me to the station to have a little chat. My parents came and picked me up, and the officer gave me a warning. He said if I went back, I'd be arrested. I was heartbroken. I finished my senior year feeling completely lost, and not long after that, I joined the army. I served for 4 years, trying to get away from the loneliness and pain. That's when I met Lori, and we got married. I honestly thought I'd never see Rachel again. But when I got out of the army and moved back here about 6 months ago, I ran into Rachel at the grocery store. We grabbed some coffee to catch up, and at first, it was completely innocent. Sure, there was a little harmless flirting, but nothing serious. Then, 2 weeks ago, I came by one afternoon when you were out of town, and things escalated. We swore it wouldn't happen again, but it did, a week later, and now today, this is only the 3rd time. We're both really sorry. We never wanted to hurt either of you. I turned to Rachel. All right, Rachel, let's hear your side of things. Rachel took a deep breath and began, the first part is exactly how David described it. We met in high school, and we dated for several months. Everything was going great until I missed my period and decided to take a pregnancy test. I'll never forget sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at that positive result, with tears streaming down my face. My mom walked in, and when she saw me crying and noticed the test, I tried to hide it, but it was too late. She was upset but did her best to comfort me. Things changed when my dad got home, though. His reaction was a lot more intense. He was furious. Once he'd calmed down, he said he would arrange for an abortion and that we couldn't tell anyone, not even David. I refused. I told them it was my body, and I didn't want to go through with it. That led to another big fight, but in the end, we came to an agreement. I could carry the baby to term, but I had to put it up for adoption. And no one could know about it, not David, not anyone. That same night, they packed me up and sent me to my Aunt Janice's place in South Dakota. It's a 7-hour drive from here. One of my dad's strictest rules was that I couldn't call or contact anyone back home, not even David, to say goodbye. If anyone found out, he said he'd disown me and kick me out of the family. I looked at Rachel, stunned. So, you have a child out there that you never told me about? Rachel nodded slowly. Yes. I went to live with Aunt Janice and finished my senior year there. I couldn't attend school that fall because, by then, I would have been showing, and that was against our agreement. Once I started to show, I became isolated in her house. I had no contact with friends, no visits from family except for my mom and dad, and even then, I was too upset to speak to them. My world became incredibly small. It was just me, Aunt Janice, and the baby growing inside me. I think that's when my depression really began to take hold, around 6 months into the pregnancy. When I finally got through that tough time, I came back home, only to find out that David had joined the army, and his family had moved away right after his graduation. I felt awful. I spent months sulking around the house, feeling lost, until Dad pushed me to get a job to help me move on. I started working at Dr. Jensen's office, and after some time, I began dating again. About a year later, I met you, Jack, and our life together was wonderful. It helped me forget about David, at least until we ran into each other at the grocery store. Well, isn't that just a sweet, innocent little tale? Lori cut in with a biting tone. A classic story of teenage love, lust, and betrayal. You both swore you'd love each other, and now look at you. If this is what you call love, maybe I should return the favor by kicking both of you out. So, were you planning to run off together, or what? Rachel quickly answered, No, Jack, I wasn't going to leave you. I love you. I never wanted to leave you. David looked taken aback by Rachel's declaration that Jack was her first choice, but he stayed silent. So, let me get this straight, I continued. Did you think I'd just stand by and accept your affair? Did you think you could have your cake and eat it too? You honestly believed you could cheat on me with David, giving him what rightfully belongs to me, whenever he wanted? Rachel shook her head. I didn't think it through like that. I didn't want to leave you, not unless David left Lori. I guess I just didn't fully understand how much this would hurt you. Turning to Lori, I asked, What do you think, darling? Do I have a loving wife here, or what? Lori sighed. I can't say I'm any better off. David and I had been dating for about a year when I got pregnant with Evan, our son. And now, I can't help but wonder if that's the only reason he married me. Clearly, he's been holding on to feelings for Rachel this whole time. David's face showed surprise at Rachel's earlier comment about not wanting to leave me, but again, he didn't say anything. Finally, though, he spoke up, though his words came out hesitant. I honestly hadn't thought it all through. I didn't want to leave you and Evan either, Lori. But a part of me thought that maybe Rachel and I could make it work. Hearing her say she loves Jack, it stings. I guess I figured she should only feel that way about me since I never met Jack. It was easy to pretend he didn't exist, to believe Rachel and I could just pick up where we left off in high school. But now, I'm all mixed up because I still love you too, Lori. I couldn't help but shake my head at both of them. They may not have betrayed each other, but they sure as hell betrayed us. Rachel and David tried to protest, but as they thought about what Lori had said, Rachel spoke up again, her voice softer. It's a different kind of love. It's not about loving one more than the other. The love I have for Jack is mature, it's built on trust and comfort. But when I'm with David, it brings back those intense feelings of first love, the kind that never had the chance to fully grow. I looked Rachel in the eyes, trying to keep my voice steady. Do you remember when we got married and exchanged vows? We promised, in front of everyone, to love and cherish each other, forsaking all others. You made a promise to love only me. And I promised the same to you. I don't recall there being any exceptions or clauses allowing for affairs. So, what other promises have you broken? Have you been faithful to me since we got married? Rachel answered, Yes, I've been faithful. That answer seems to need more explaining, I said, raising an eyebrow. Have you ever done more than just flirt with someone else? Not since we got married, Rachel replied. And what about when we were dating? I pressed. Rachel hesitated. Well, when we first started dating, we weren't exclusive right away. I was still seeing someone else when you asked me out, and I kept seeing him until we agreed to be exclusive. I never told you about a few times when we met up just for physical intimacy, Rachel admitted. I felt guilty because I had just ended things with him for you. So, basically, you were lying and cheating on me right from the start? I asked, my frustration rising. How many times did this happen? It was only a few times, Rachel answered, her voice soft. It didn't mean anything to me. Well, it sure means something to me, I shot back. It means you were unfaithful and took away time we could have spent together. No, Jack, she replied quickly. These times were only on nights when you were out of town for work. We wouldn't have been together anyway. But that means you had to contact him and arrange these meetings, I pointed out. Even if you convinced yourself it was just a casual fling, you made the effort to set it up. That sounds like premeditated cheating to me. Rachel didn't have much to say to that. Her head hung low, and she mumbled, it wasn't like that. Then tell me, when did you finally end it with him, and why? The last time we met was about 4 months before we got married, she said, almost whispering. It was a goodbye because he got transferred to another city. Before that, our last meeting was 2 months after we started dating. So, what you're saying is, it could have kept going as long as you had an excuse. I asked, trying to wrap my head around everything. I was just trying to figure things out, Rachel said, her voice breaking a little. I turned toward Lori. Anything you need to confess? Rachel's head jerked up, anger flashing in her eyes, but then she lowered it again in shame. I have one more confession, she began, her voice trembling. At my bachelorette party, I drank way too much. They hired a male dancer for a private performance, and things got out of hand. My maid of honor joined in, and we both got worked up. I ended up being intimate with the dancer in front of her. I know now that I shouldn't have trusted Jenny, and I deeply regret it. I see now that my actions showed a lack of respect for our vows, and I'm truly sorry. Lori looked at David, her face stern. David, is there anything you haven't told me? Anything you've done with Rachel that you wouldn't have if I were around? David sighed. I went out with another girl once while we were still dating, but we weren't exclusive at the time. And sure, I've flirted a little here and there over the years, but I've never done anything I'm really ashamed of. This just happened. It spiraled out of control. We didn't mean to hurt either of you. Being sorry doesn't fix everything, Lori said coldly. I agree, I added, my anger simmering just below the surface. I don't think David planned for this to happen, but my wife, well, she seems to have a pattern of behavior that suggests she struggles with being faithful. Rachel looked down, tears welling up, but I wasn't done. My frustration spilled over as I continued, wasn't our relationship good enough for you? We were intimate at least 3 times a week, sometimes 4. How often was I getting leftovers, after you'd been with David? Even if you cleaned up, it still felt like I was getting something already used. Was my love not enough? Or did you just need something different? I stared at her, waiting for an answer, but all she could do was whisper, it wasn't like that. So, what other promises have you broken? I demanded. Have you always been faithful to me since we got married? Yes, I've been faithful since we got married, Rachel insisted. I wasn't convinced. That sounds like it needs more explanation. Have you ever done more than just flirt with someone else? Rachel shook her head. Not since we were married. And what about when we were dating? I asked, still pressing. Rachel hesitated again before finally admitting, well, when we first started dating, we weren't exclusive. I was still seeing someone else when you asked me out, and I kept seeing him until we officially agreed to be exclusive. And you never told me about those times you met up just for physical intimacy, I said, almost accusingly. You kept that from me while starting a relationship with me. I know, she said quietly. I felt terrible about it, especially since I'd just ended things with him for you. I shook my head, feeling the weight of her betrayal. So, you've been lying to me almost from the start. They sure mean something to me, I said, my voice firm. They show that you were unfaithful and stole time we could have spent together. No, Jack, Rachel responded, her voice shaking. Those times only happened when you were away on business. We wouldn't have been together anyway. That's not the point, I said, frustrated. You still had to reach out and arrange those meetings. Even if you convinced yourself it was just casual, you initiated it. That sounds like premeditated cheating to me. Rachel didn't respond right away, her head hanging low. It wasn't like that, she finally mumbled. When did you finally end it with him, and why? I asked, my patience running thin. The last time we met was 4 months before we got married, Rachel admitted quietly. It was a goodbye because he got transferred to another city. Before that, our last meeting was 2 months after we started dating. So, it could have gone on as long as there was an excuse, right? I pressed, my anger rising again. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. I wish things had been different, she said softly. I love you, Jack. I regret how things turned out and how they've affected our relationship. Is this because I didn't give you enough attention? I asked, trying to understand. I'm not out of town all that often, and when I am, I make an effort to make our time together special. I've tried to build a good life for us. Was that not enough for you? It wasn't about you, Jack, Rachel said through her tears. It was about David and me and our unresolved relationship. You've been a wonderful husband. My actions weren't a reflection of how I feel about you. So, what? I shot back. Did you think I was just some provider, someone you could overlook when a better opportunity came along? Am I just a stepping stone to something better? No, Jack, Rachel said, shaking her head. When I married you, it was because I loved you and wanted to spend my life with you. I still do. I'm so sorry this happened. Interesting that you call it an accident, I replied coldly. You brought him into our home, our sanctuary. That shows a lack of respect. Rachel looked at me with desperate eyes. Is there still a chance for us, Jack? I really do love you. I paused for a moment, then said, maybe, in time, I could forgive you, but I'll never forget this. It's going to take a long time before I can even think about trusting you again. Can you handle me constantly checking up on you, always monitoring where you are and who you're with? Because I'll tell you this, David can never be part of our lives again. That's a choice you need to make right now. Rachel's tears flowed freely as she struggled to respond. I don't want you to feel forced to be loyal out of fear or threats, I continued. I want to be with someone who genuinely wants to be with me, someone who will be faithful. I need to know if that's what you want, if you want this more than anything. Rachel hesitated, her gaze shifting between David and me. That's a big decision. Your hesitation says a lot, I said, shaking my head. It tells me you might not love me more than him. And even if you choose me now, you'll probably regret it soon. Rachel tried to move toward me, but she forgot that her hand was still gripping David, dragging him along with her. Realizing her mistake, she stopped and dropped to her knees, sobbing. Please, Jack, give me another chance. I looked at her, my heart heavy. You made your choices, Rachel, I said quietly. Now you have to live with the consequences. Turning to David, Laurie spoke up. David, it looks like Rachel might be free soon. Do you want to stay with your family or try to be with her? David stood in silence, unsure of how to respond. Laurie continued, if you want to stay with me, you need to prove that you're worth keeping around. I need to know that you really want this. David sighed heavily. I'm sorry, darling, he muttered, his guilt weighing on him. Laurie broke down, burying her face in her hands as she slumped onto the couch. I looked around the room, feeling the tension suffocating us all. Well, I said bitterly, now we see everyone's true colors, don't we? Some people, when faced with a situation like this, might resort to violence or humiliation. Some people, when faced with betrayal like this, might grab a gun or resort to extreme measures, maybe even publicly humiliate both parties involved. But that's not who I am, I said, the tension in the room easing just a bit. That doesn't mean there won't be consequences. I turned to Rachel. If you remember, because of the nature of my work, I had to insist on a prenup before we got married. Your first punishment is tied to that. You'll only be entitled to a small fraction of what we've accumulated together. If you'd managed to make it a little longer, you might have gotten more. But you couldn't even make it to our second anniversary. I paused, letting that sink in before continuing. The prenup states that if either of us cheats, we receive either $10,000 or 5% of our total assets, whichever is less, for each year of loyalty. After 10 years, we would have split things equally, but the plane is off limits, of course. You can have the bed where all of this went down, because I sure as hell don't want it. Rachel's face turned pale as she absorbed my words. As for David, I went on, he's already facing his punishment. You've cost him the ability to father children or engage in any intimate activities. You'll have to live with that knowledge. David's eyes widened in shock, and Lori glanced between us, a mix of confusion and disbelief on her face. I didn't elaborate any further, but the message was clear enough. Come with me to the kitchen, I whispered to Lori, leading her out of the room. Once we were alone, I explained, I used a form of mental influence to ensure David's actions would have lasting consequences. It may sound drastic, but given what he's done, I felt it was necessary. I didn't cause him any physical harm, but I made sure he'll understand the seriousness of his actions, and that he'll never repeat them. Lori gave me a small, hesitant smile. I wasn't expecting to see that today, I said, managing a smile of my own. But it's a nice one. Don't lose it, okay? I know this is a hard time for you and Evan. Promise me that if you ever need anything or just need to talk, you'll call me. I'm not a bad guy. I want to help where I can. I paused before adding, your life just changed drastically, you've gone from having a complete family to being a single parent with a young child. That's a huge shift. My life won't change as much, I've got my family's support, and I'll get through this with their help. But you? You may have to figure out whether you're going to kick David out or leave yourself. Staying might be better for Evan, but I understand if you can't afford the house. Talk it over with your family. They know your situation and can give you more objective advice. Lori nodded. I will, she said. But in the meantime, it's clear David's not welcome anymore. And Jack, thank you. I appreciate your offer to help, no strings attached. It might even be good for both of us. As we headed back into the room, we could hear voices raised in argument. David and Rachel were fighting. Why did you go for my balls? David shouted, clearly in pain. I can't believe you did that. Rachel shot back, he made me do it. I didn't have a choice. I didn't see him force you, David replied bitterly. I stepped in before things escalated further. Your actions led to this, I said, looking at both of them. You both got what you deserved. David, your behavior made 4 divorce lawyers very happy, but it left your spouses and child heartbroken. This is the first time since I've been married that I'm actually relieved we don't have a child. Rachel's face crumbled. Jack, please reconsider, she begged. I shook my head. I've tried to give you chances, I said. But you made what should have been an easy decision a lot harder. You hesitated because part of you still wants both of us. That might work for some people who cheat, but it won't work for me. It won't work for Lori either. I glanced at Lori, who nodded in agreement. For any relationship to survive, there needs to be love, trust, and respect. Maybe you think you love us, but neither of us feels like there's any trust or respect left. The reality of the situation seemed to finally hit Rachel. She collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. I could only hope she and David found whatever happiness they thought they'd have together, because Lori and I were done with both of them. Period. I gave them a final look before adding, "Forget what I said about my job and my ability to influence minds. It doesn't matter anymore." I told them to make sure they never forget today, remembering not just what happened but the impact of their choices. David needed to publicly admit their wrongdoing, and he shouldn't even think about contesting the divorce. Lori spoke up, breaking the silence. "I need to pick Evan up from the sitter and head home. David, I don't know where you're sleeping tonight, but it won't be with me. Don't come home. When you found somewhere to stay, we'll work out getting your things." She grabbed her purse and, without looking back, added, "Goodbye, David. Jack, take care of her." David yelled after her, then rushed to follow, but quickly remembered his lack of clothes and bolted upstairs. Less than 30 seconds later, he was mostly dressed and out the door, leaving just Rachel and me behind. I turned to her, my voice cold. "Don't just sit there. Get dressed and get out. You've got 10 minutes, or I'll start throwing your stuff out onto the lawn." I glanced at my watch. "The clock's ticking. You better hurry." Rachel gave me a desperate look, but when she saw no sign of sympathy in my face, she slowly got up and went upstairs to pack. 11 minutes later, she came back down, sniffling, her eyes red from crying. "Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do?" she asked, her voice small and broken. "You should have thought about that before you had your affair," I replied, the words sharper than I intended. "You're not my problem anymore. This hurts me to say, but there's been enough pain for one day. I needed to do this to make a clean break, for both of us." She stared at me, her lips trembling. "What did you tell my dad?" she asked. "Did you tell him why?" "No," I said. "I didn't tell him anything. I just told him to come get you because you weren't staying here anymore and needed somewhere to go. You'll explain it to him when you're ready." Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Jack, don't you love me anymore?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Yes, Rachel, I do. I still love you, and that's what makes this so hard. I gave you everything I had, and feelings like that don't just disappear overnight. But I can't live with you anymore. I think, in time, we'll both be better off apart. It's going to hurt, especially at first, but it's best if we see as little of each other as possible for the next year or so, to give ourselves time to heal and move on." She stood there, eyes swollen and puffy from crying, trying to take in everything I was saying. "I'll talk to a lawyer tomorrow and get the divorce started," I continued. "It should be simple with the prenup. Please don't fight this. Dragging it out will just make the pain worse." Rachel was still standing there, sniffling, her sad eyes locked on me. I couldn't tell if she was starting to accept what I'd said or if she was still looking for a way to change my mind. Before she could say anything else, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, I was expecting Richard, her father, but he wasn't alone. Anne, her mother, had come with him. Rachel ran straight into her mother's arms, crying openly. Richard turned to me, his voice calm but serious. "If you've done anything to hurt her, you'll regret ever taking a breath." Richard was the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to make a threat, and when he spoke like that, it was impossible not to take him seriously. "Richard," I said, trying to remain calm, "I haven't laid a hand on her. Her bags are right there. When she's ready, she'll tell you everything. You're throwing her out. What did she do to deserve that?" Richard asked, his voice steady but with a sharp edge to it. "I'd rather she tell you herself," I said quietly. "It's too painful for me to go over it again." Richard didn't say another word. He just picked up Rachel's suitcases and walked her and to the car, his eyes never leaving me. Once they were gone, I shut the door and collapsed into the recliner. The weight of everything hit me at once, and I broke down. I cried until I drifted off to sleep, only waking up when the morning sun streamed through the bay window. The next morning, I knew it was time to face the rest of my life. I took a shower, got dressed, and called my boss to take the day off. Then, I reached out to my lawyer to get the ball rolling on the divorce. I closed our joint accounts, opened new ones in my name, and started handling the other formalities. The divorce went through smoothly. Rachel didn't contest it, and in the end, it was over quickly. A month went by, and I still hadn't heard from Lori, so I decided to give her a call. She told me she and Evan had moved back in with her parents, who had plenty of space and welcomed them with open arms. They'd put their old house up for sale. David and Rachel had found a small apartment together, but according to Lori, they were arguing pretty often. Lori also asked me about the hypnotic suggestion I'd given to David and Rachel. Is it permanent? Will he always believe nothing's there? I chuckled. Never underestimate the power of denial. After a few years, and maybe with some convincing from doctors or others, he might start questioning it and eventually break the illusion. But then again, maybe not. It's not exactly the kind of thing people talk about openly. Now that the anger had subsided a bit, I felt a twinge of pity for him. Did you really have to go that far? Lori asked. I just smirked in response. Over time, I'd become like an adopted uncle to Evan, and Lori and I had turned into casual friends with benefits. Every couple of weeks, we'd meet up. Honestly, I would have liked something more serious, but she wasn't interested in that. Too many bad memories, I guess. When I went to Evan's 4th birthday party, I noticed a man I didn't recognize. I asked Lori if she had a new friend, and she confirmed she did. I told her I didn't want to intrude and that she knew how to reach me if she ever needed anything. 7 months later, she married him. Seeing Lori with someone new made me realize it was time for me to start dating again. I met a nice woman at the mall, and we've been together for several months now. I'm starting to trust her, though I can't shake off being a bit more suspicious than I'd like to be, given everything I've been through. About 14 months after the divorce, I ran into David at the grocery store. Ironically, he told me that Rachel had cheated on him because he couldn't satisfy her, and he had ended up kicking her out, just like what happened between me and Rachel. For a brief moment, I felt sympathy for him. I knew exactly what he was going through. So, David, I asked, do you think you've learned your lesson? He looked confused. What lesson are you talking about? Will you ever cheat again or get involved with a married woman? He shook his head. I wouldn't, even if I could. My ex-wife's furious with me and hardly lets me see Evan. The girlfriend I cheated with ended up cheating on me too, and now I'm stuck eating TV dinners by myself every night. Sometimes, I don't even know why I keep going. And on top of it all, I can't find any relief in the usual ways. I sighed. I'm sorry for the role I played in that mess, but you need to keep going for Evan's sake. We all make mistakes, but he still needs you. Look, I know some people who might be able to help you, in a way you won't even notice. I can't promise anything, but I'll see what they can do. David raised an eyebrow. What should I do? On Friday night, have a few drinks, pass out in bed, and when you wake up, you might be in for a pleasant surprise, I said, giving him a knowing look. I won't say a word, he replied quickly. Good, I continued. But if I find out you've cheated again or gotten involved with another married woman, I'll come back and make sure you don't have that issue anymore. Understood? David nodded. I understand. Thanks, Jack. If this works, I'll owe you big time. You have no idea how much I've been suffering. Let's see if they can help before you do anything drastic, I said. And remember, keep this to yourself. As I walked away, I gave him a look that hinted he'd have his equipment back soon enough, though he might have a rough morning too. About 6 weeks later, I ran into Richard and at the mall. I was planning to just wave and keep moving, but Richard signaled that he wanted to talk. "Jack, could I have a word?" he asked. I shrugged. "Sure, go ahead." Richard and both expressed their regret about everything that had happened. Richard, in particular, seemed weighed down by it all. "I feel like part of this is my fault," he said. "We didn't handle things well when Rachel got pregnant, and I think that played a role in all of this." They wanted to apologize and hoped that I could forgive them. "Richard, Anne, you didn't make her do anything," I said, trying to reassure them. "It's true, maybe you could have been more supportive, but I know you were just trying to do what you thought was right at the time. Hindsight is always clearer. I don't hold any grudges against you, so there's really no need to apologize." "Thanks, Jack," Richard said, clearly relieved. "We appreciate that. We also wanted to let you know that we've sent Rachel to a therapist. At first it was just to help her deal with the fallout of the affair, but it turns out she had a lot more to work through. She's improving. The therapist suggested that it might be helpful if you attended one of her sessions. You're not obligated, of course, but it could aid her recovery. It's up to you." I nodded, understanding the weight of what he was asking. "I'll think about it," I said, knowing it would mean reopening old wounds. Richard and left, and I sat there for a moment, reflecting. "She doesn't even have to be there if you prefer," Richard had said. "I know it would stir up some old pain, but it could really help her, and that's important to both of us. Do you think you could do that for her, and for us?" I'd stared at them, weighing their words. They were good people who, like me, had made mistakes. And despite everything, their friendship still mattered. With a sigh, I replied, "Let me know the time and place, and I'll do my best to be there." Their faces lit up with relief. "Thank you so much, Jack. We'll call you as soon as she sets it up with Dr. Thompson. Her regular session is tomorrow, but how about next Thursday at 4? We finalized the details, and as luck would have it, I was able to attend. I arrived at the office 5 minutes early, finding Rachel already seated in the waiting room, sitting on the couch. She greeted me with a pleasant smile, but there was a reserved quality about her, like she wasn't sure where we stood and didn't want to overstep. "Hello, Jack," she said warmly. "You're looking well." Rachel was dressed in a navy skirt and jacket, with a white blouse buttoned up modestly, a professional look that suggested familiarity without crossing any lines. "Rachel," I responded, giving her a small smile. "You look as good as I've ever seen you. This therapist must be doing wonders." "Thank you," she replied. "I really appreciate you coming today. It means a lot to me, and to my parents." She hesitated for a moment, then added, "I just want to be upfront, this isn't about reconciliation. I can't live like that." "I understand," I said, knowing this was inevitable. "I've prepared myself for that. Though, I won't lie, there's still a small part of me that hoped, even if I know it's unrealistic." She looked down, fiddling with the hem of her jacket. "I guess you've heard about David and me." "Yes," I said. "And don't take this the wrong way, but I wasn't exactly surprised. You've always had a strong need for intimacy, and with David unable to meet those needs, I figured you'd struggle." Rachel nodded. "I understand. Dr. Thompson has been helping me figure out why I acted the way I did with you and David. He's also helped me process a lot of the unresolved pain from my pregnancy and miscarriage. We believe that was a major factor in my behavior." "I'm not sure how much I can help you now," I said honestly. "This feels a bit like one of those 12-step programs where you admit your mistakes, apologize, and try to make amends. It's a way for you to heal, I get that, but I'm not sure where I fit in." "The 12-step program is usually for addictions," I added, a bit confused. "It is," Rachel confirmed. "I've come to realize I've been dealing with sex addiction for a long time." She took a deep breath before continuing. After David and I split up, I was going out every night. I'd pick up strangers and sleep with anyone who showed even the slightest interest. It became this unhealthy cycle that I couldn't break. I was often drunk, Rachel admitted, her voice heavy with regret. Between the alcohol and the hookups, I was just trying to numb the pain. My parents eventually found out what was going on and got me the help I needed. Thankfully, I didn't contract anything serious. I'm doing a lot better now, and I haven't been involved with anyone for over 3 months. The room went quiet as I absorbed this revelation. It was a lot to take in. Before I could respond, Dr. Thompson appeared and ushered us into his office. The session was intense, full of difficult emotions, but by the end of it, I felt a strange sense of release, like a weight had been lifted, even if just a little. As we walked out of the building, Rachel turned to me. "Jack, thank you again for coming today. It really meant a lot to me. Would you be open to grabbing coffee or maybe having a meal together?" I shook my head gently. "Not today. I've had enough for now. I want you to know, though, that I do feel bad about how things ended between us, especially knowing how much you struggled. Maybe someday we can be friends, but I'm not there yet." Rachel nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I get it, Jack. I'd like for us to be friends eventually. You still mean a lot to me." We both stood there for a moment, unsure of what else to say. Finally, I gestured toward the parking lot. "I'm parked this way, so I guess this is goodbye for now. Good luck with your recovery." Rachel gave a faint smile, but I could see the sadness behind it. I leaned in and gave her a quick peck on the cheek before turning and walking away, toward the setting sun. I didn't look back, but I could feel her watching as my silhouette grew smaller in the fading light. A single tear rolled down her cheek as she realized I was walking out of her life for the last time.